Before his death, Jean-François Champollion, the man who unlocked the Rosetta Stone, confessed, "The more I read their words, the more I fear they were never meant for the living." What began as a quest for knowledge turned into a descent into Egypt's darkest secrets. In his final days, he hinted at a discovery so terrifying that he dared not reveal it. What did he find hidden in those ancient symbols? The answer may change everything we thought we knew about ancient Egypt. The discovery that shook the world. When Napoleon Bonaparte set sail for Egypt in 1798, his ambitions went beyond war. He wanted not only to conquer the land of the pharaohs, but also to uncover its ancient mysteries. So, along with thousands of soldiers, he brought a team of brilliant scholars, artists, engineers, and scientists. These men, known as the savants, were tasked with studying everything they could: ancient ruins, plants, animals, and even the stars above the desert. Their work later became the monumental series Description de l'Egypte, a treasure trove of knowledge that revealed Egypt's hidden wonders to the world. In the scorching summer of July 1799, near the small Egyptian town of Rosetta, now Rashid, one of Napoleon's soldiers stumbled upon something that would change human history. While repairing the old walls of Fort Rashid, Lieutenant Pierre-François Xavier Bouchard noticed a large, dark stone half buried in the sand. It wasn't gold or jewels that caught his eye, but strange carvings covering its smooth, black surface. The stone bore 3 separate scripts, one in Greek, one in an unfamiliar flowing script later called Demotic, and one in mysterious ancient symbols, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Bouchard realized immediately that the find was extraordinary. He sent the slab to his commanding officers, who in turn notified the scholars traveling with Napoleon's army. When they examined it, they were astonished. The Greek section could be read easily, and it mentioned that the same text was written in the sacred script and the native script. Suddenly, the scholars understood what they held in their hands, a possible key to unlocking the long-lost language of ancient Egypt. The stone itself was a piece of dark granodiorite, about 4 feet tall, with a polished face and chipped corners. Despite its damaged top and missing edges, it was still remarkably well preserved. The Greek text identified it as a decree issued in 196 BCE by priests in Memphis, praising King Ptolemy V and confirming his divine status. But it was the other 2 scripts, the Demotic and the hieroglyphic, that held the real mystery. For over 1,000 years, no one in the world could read hieroglyphs. The meaning behind those tiny owls' eyes and suns had been swallowed by time. When Napoleon's army was defeated by the British in 1801, the precious stone became part of the spoils of war. According to the Treaty of Alexandria, it was handed over to the British, packed carefully, and shipped to London. In 1802, it went on display at the British Museum, where it remains today. Copies and plaster casts were soon made and sent to scholars all over Europe. Everyone wanted a chance to solve the riddle carved into the stone. Let's meet the brilliant men who joined that race and see how close they came to breaking the code before a young Frenchman changed history forever. The rival quest. Among the first modern scholars to tackle the mystery was Sylvestre de Sacy, one of France's most respected Orientalists and a master of ancient languages. He was also the teacher of a young man who would later make history, Jean-François Champollion. De Sacy was brilliant but cautious. He believed that hieroglyphs were mainly symbolic, representing ideas rather than sounds. His influence shaped early European debates about whether the Egyptian script was phonetic, like the alphabet, or purely pictorial. Under his guidance, French scholars made small but important progress in understanding the structure of the mysterious scripts. Around the same time, a Swedish diplomat named Johann David Åkerblad made a bold attempt to decode the demotic portion of the Rosetta Stone. By 1802, he had identified about 15 individual signs, realizing that some of them might represent sounds rather than whole words. Åkerblad compared these signs with Coptic, the last surviving form of the Egyptian language, still used by Christian communities in Egypt. His insight was sharp, but his methods were incomplete. Without a clear system or full understanding of how the scripts worked together, his progress stopped just short of a major breakthrough. Then came Thomas Young, an English polymath who seemed capable of mastering anything: medicine, mathematics, physics, and now ancient languages. By 1814, Young made a discovery that brought him close to the edge of the solution. He noticed that a set of oval rings called cartouches surrounded certain hieroglyphic symbols. He suspected these marked royal names. Using the Greek text for guidance, he correctly identified the name Ptolemy within one of them. It was the first real proof that some hieroglyphs represented sounds. But Young's brilliance was limited by his own caution. He believed phonetic signs were used only for foreign names, not native Egyptian words. He refused to extend the phonetic principle further, fearing ridicule from his peers. When he published his findings, many criticized him for being too uncertain. Others accused him of trying to claim more credit than he deserved. The race to decode the stone became not just an academic challenge, but a matter of national pride. England and France both wanted to claim victory for their scholars. By the early 1820s, the field was filled with frustration. The inscriptions still did not fully match, and scholars struggled to see the patterns connecting them. Without the key link between Coptic and ancient Egyptian, every attempt led to a dead end. Rivalries grew bitter, accusations of plagiarism flew between camps, and progress seemed to halt. Young and de Sacy had cracked the surface of the mystery, but they were still trapped outside the door. The world waited for someone bold enough to step through, and that person was coming. A restless young French scholar whose obsession with Coptic and fearless thinking would finally take the first true leap into the lost language of the pharaohs. Champollion's early years. Jean-François Champollion's story began in the small French town of Figeac on December 23, 1790. From a very young age, he showed signs of rare genius. While other children were learning to write simple sentences, he was already fascinated by strange alphabets and forgotten languages. By the time he reached his teenage years, Champollion could read and write Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, Chaldean, and Persian. His teachers were astonished. It was as if he carried an inner hunger to understand how humans had once spoken, written, and thought. Restless, emotional, and fiercely ambitious, he was not just a student of languages, he was a seeker of secrets buried in time. Behind this young prodigy stood someone who quietly shaped his destiny, his older brother, Jacques-Joseph Champollion. Jacques was more than a brother. He was Jean-François's mentor, guide, and greatest supporter. A librarian by profession, Jacques surrounded himself with books and scholars. Their home became a little world of ideas where ancient maps, manuscripts, and old language charts filled every corner. Jean-François, the younger brother, spent hours lost among these volumes, tracing symbols and comparing alphabets. Jacques believed deeply in his brother's potential and provided him not just with resources, but with emotional strength. Whenever Jean-François doubted himself, it was Jacques who reminded him that his purpose was greater, to bring a forgotten language back to life. At 17, Jean-François moved to Paris to study at the prestigious Collège de France. There, he studied under Sylvestre de Sacy, the same Orientalist who had taught some of Europe's greatest linguists. Paris, full of scholars and scientific debate, became the perfect place for him to sharpen his skills. He immersed himself in Arabic, Persian, and other ancient languages, but one stood out above all others: Coptic. This old Egyptian tongue, still used by Christian priests in Egypt, seemed to him a living echo of the ancient world. While others treated Coptic as a curiosity, Champollion became convinced that it was the direct descendant of the language of the pharaohs. If he could master it, he might one day read what no one else could. Soon, he began working with copies of the Rosetta Stone, which had already caused excitement across Europe. The original was in the British Museum, but French scholars had made careful reproductions. Champollion pored over them day and night. He studied the demotic and hieroglyphic sections, checking them against the Greek text. When he read about Auquerblas's earlier work identifying several demotic characters, he confirmed many of them himself, adding a few new interpretations of his own. Unlike others, he did not rely on guesswork. He applied the logic of languages, comparing grammar, roots, and structure. Then came his most important insight: the Coptic bridge. He noticed that certain signs in the demotic text seemed to match familiar Coptic words. This was the spark. If Coptic was indeed the final stage of ancient Egyptian, then the older scripts might still follow similar phonetic rules. Champollion realized that hieroglyphs could represent both sounds and ideas, a combination no one had seriously proposed before. Building on this, he formed a daring hypothesis. The Egyptian writing system was mixed. It used phonetic symbols for sounds, logograms for words, and ideograms for ideas. This theory broke the rigid belief that hieroglyphs were only symbolic. For the first time, someone was seeing Egyptian writing as a true language rather than a mystical code. By 1821, Champollion was ready. He had a working system in his mind, a way to read what had been silent for over 1,000 years. All that remained was to test it on the Rosetta Stone itself. And when he did, history would never be the same again. Let's follow him step by step as he applied his theory, unlocking the ancient words and unveiling a truth so powerful that it would change our understanding of Egypt forever. Deciphering the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone had 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Jean-François Champollion approached the problem with a clear, systematic plan. He began with the royal cartouches, the oval rings enclosing the names of pharaohs. These were his perfect test cases because the same names appeared in the Greek text below. If he could match them letter by letter, the secret of Egyptian writing might finally be exposed. He started with Ptolemy and Cleopatra. By comparing their Greek spellings with the patterns inside the Egyptian cartouches, Champollion began to see order emerge from chaos. Certain symbols repeated themselves in both names, like the sound S that appeared twice in Ptolemaios. Slowly, he assigned phonetic values to individual signs. Each new match brought him closer to proving that hieroglyphs were not just pictures, they were sounds. On September 14, 1822, the truth struck him like lightning. After days of sleepless work, he suddenly realized that his phonetic values could also be applied to names of native Egyptian rulers, not just Greek ones. He had broken the final barrier. Overwhelmed by the discovery, he ran to his brother's house, burst into the room, and shouted, "Je tiens mon affaire! I've got it!" Then, overcome with emotion, he collapsed to the floor. His body gave out, but his mind had opened the door to the lost world of Egypt. When he recovered, Champollion set to work documenting his discovery. Within 2 weeks, he wrote the famous Lettre à Monsieur Dacier, an 8-page paper addressed to the secretary of the French Academy. In it, he described his alphabet of phonetic hieroglyphs, listing over 100 signs that represented distinct sounds. On September 27, 1822, he presented his findings to the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres in Paris. The hall was silent as he explained how centuries of mystery had been unlocked by a single principle. Hieroglyphs were a living language. Champollion then began decoding more names. The name Ramesses revealed itself through the sun disk symbol for Ra, followed by the double S signs. Thutmose emerged when he identified the ibis symbol of the god Thoth, combined with phonetic signs spelling Ms. One by one, the names of pharaohs, queens, and even Roman emperors came alive. He had identified 111 distinct phonetic signs by the time his letter was complete. The reaction across Europe was electric. Some praised him as a genius, while others, like Thomas Young, accused him of borrowing too much from their work. Champollion ignored the noise. He refined his methods, fixing small mistakes and extending his system beyond royal names to everyday words. For the first time in over a millennium, scholars could read Egyptian prayers, titles, and even conversations etched into temple walls. Let's now uncover what was hidden within those ancient texts and the terrifying truths they revealed about Egypt's forgotten past. The terrifying truths from ancient Egypt. When Jean-François Champollion finally unlocked the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the world expected tales of glory, wisdom, and divine perfection. What he found instead was something darker, an ancient civilization both magnificent and merciless. The Rosetta Stone itself, once seen as a peaceful relic, revealed its true nature. It was not a story of discovery or philosophy, but a royal decree written to glorify King Ptolemy V. The priests who composed it filled the stone with praises, promises of loyalty, and detailed orders to honor the young ruler as a living god. Every word was meant to strengthen royal control and silence dissent. Beneath the language of devotion, Champollion saw the machinery of power, the way religion and politics intertwined to command obedience. As Champollion's translations continued, he moved beyond royal decrees into the heart of Egypt's spiritual world. He began reading the Book of the Dead, the sacred funerary text buried with the deceased to guide them through the afterlife. What he found was astonishing and chilling. These texts spoke of judgment after death, of monstrous gods weighing a person's heart against the feather of truth. They revealed curses carved into tombs, warning trespassers of torment and destruction. Spells promised revenge against enemies, and rituals described how spirits could return to punish the living. Behind Egypt's golden beauty lay a world ruled by fear of the unseen, by constant negotiation with gods who demanded loyalty, blood, and sacrifice. Even the most glorious temples carried messages of manipulation. Pharaohs portrayed themselves as eternal and divine, yet Champollion's readings uncovered the opposite. Inscriptions hinted at failed wars, rebellions crushed in secret, and times of famine when even the gods seemed silent. Great kings erased the names of their rivals and claimed victories that never happened. What had once been worshipped as holy history was now exposed as political theater. Other carvings told of pain and despair. Walls that once seemed only decorative now spoke of disease and death. Some tombs mentioned pestilence spreading through the land. Others pleaded for forgiveness from angry gods. Inscriptions revealed betrayals within the royal court, murders, stolen thrones, and forgotten heirs. The language of eternity was haunted by fear of mortality. Most haunting of all were the voices of ordinary people. In contracts, letters, and prayers, Champollion found stories of grief and injustice. Priests begged for payment, farmers pleaded for mercy, and families mourned their lost children. For the first time in centuries, these silenced lives spoke again, telling of love, loss, and suffering that had once been buried beneath the sand. But to truly understand those haunting truths, Champollion had to leave his desk and face Egypt itself. Expedition to Egypt, dangers and rivalries in the field. With the support of the French government and the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Champollion finally set out in 1828 on a long-awaited expedition to Egypt. It was a joint French-Tuscan mission designed to explore, document, and authenticate Egyptian monuments. For Champollion, it was also deeply personal, proof that his theory of hieroglyphic writing could stand up to the ultimate test, real inscriptions that no European had ever translated before. The journey itself was an ordeal. Traveling up the Nile meant facing blistering heat, constant illness, and endless logistical challenges. Supplies were hard to find, and the desert offered no mercy. He traveled with a small team of scholars, artists, and assistants who sketched and traced every inscription they came across. Local guides and workers helped them reach remote temples buried in sand or hidden by debris. Nights were often spent under the stars, surrounded by silence, broken only by the sound of the river. Reaching the great temples of Luxor, Karnak, and Abu Simbel, Champollion faced another kind of obstacle: authority. Many sites were under strict local or colonial control, and obtaining permission to copy inscriptions required negotiation, patience, and sometimes bribery. Some walls were eroded, others vandalized by treasure hunters. Many passages were blocked, forcing his team to crawl through narrow, suffocating corridors filled with dust and bats. Yet nothing stopped him. He read the carved signs directly, confirming the same phonetic system he had built from the Rosetta Stone. At last, Egypt's temples began to speak in their own voice, but the field was filled with rivals. Other European scholars and collectors were racing to claim discoveries for themselves. Rumors spread that some had stolen or deliberately damaged carvings to prevent competitors from studying them. National pride mixed with scholarly jealousy, turning Egypt's sands into a battlefield of intellect and ambition. Champollion, often accused of arrogance, had to fight not only the desert, but also the politics of knowledge. The hardships were immense. The scorching sun left him weak. Disease struck repeatedly, and exhaustion became constant. Letters home spoke of his failing health and loneliness. Still, he pressed on, convinced that the truth of ancient Egypt was worth every sacrifice. By the time he returned to France, his notebooks were filled with drawings, translations, and new discoveries that confirmed his theories. He had proven that hieroglyphs were indeed a complex blend of sound and meaning. Yet his return was not one of celebration alone. Rival scholars were waiting, ready to challenge his conclusions and claim a share of his glory. And as his body began to fail him, Champollion faced one last battle against time itself, death, legacy, and the undying mystery. When Jean-François Champollion returned from Egypt, he was no longer just a scholar, he was a living legend. The man who had unlocked the language of the pharaohs was hailed as the father of Egyptology. France celebrated him with honor, and his lifelong dream was realized when he was appointed as the first chair of Egyptian history and archaeology at the Collège de France. It was a historic moment, not only for him, but for the birth of a new science, Egyptology itself. Champollion began teaching, writing, and sharing his discoveries. Determined to create a foundation that would outlive him, he dreamed of training a generation of scholars who would continue what he had begun. But beneath the surface of success, his body and mind were collapsing. Years of overwork in Egypt's brutal climate had taken their toll. His health, already fragile, worsened with every passing month. He suffered from fevers, chest infections, and chronic fatigue, yet refused to rest. The letters from his last years reveal a man both triumphant and tormented, haunted by the vastness of what he had uncovered and the limits of his time left to explore it. Between 1828 and 1832, as his energy dwindled, Champollion continued to work late into the night. Surrounded by piles of manuscripts and unfinished translations, he often muttered that the hieroglyphs were alive, that they whispered secrets he could not yet fully understand. Even as death approached, his dedication never faltered. Before his passing in 1832, he completed the manuscripts for two monumental works: Grammaire Égyptienne and Dictionnaire Égyptien, a comprehensive grammar and lexicon of the ancient language. These were published after his death by his brother, Jacques Joseph, and became the cornerstone for all future Egyptological research. They proved that Champollion's method was not a lucky guess, but a true science of language. However, his legacy was not without conflict. The debate between Champollion and the English polymath Thomas Young continued long after both men's deaths. Scholars and nationalists argued over who truly deserved credit for the decipherment of the Rosetta Stone. Accusations of plagiarism, misinterpretation, and intellectual theft circulated across Europe. Even today, historians continue to revisit this rivalry, some viewing Champollion as a genius, others as a man who perfected rather than discovered. Yet, the most haunting part of Champollion's legacy lies not in what he solved, but in what he left unsolved. Despite unlocking the basic structure of hieroglyphic writing, countless symbols, damaged inscriptions, and half-buried stelae still defied translation. Some texts appeared to contain references that even he found disturbing, cryptic allusions to forgotten gods, rituals, and cosmic origins. Certain fragments were so complex that Champollion feared they might reveal truths meant to remain hidden. These unfinished translations became his silent companions until his final days. Today, nearly 2 centuries later, modern technology, AI imaging, 3D scanning, and linguistic modeling continue to build upon Champollion's foundation. Yet even with all this progress, mysteries remain. Some hieroglyphs still refuse to speak, their meanings buried beneath centuries of silence. Was there something Champollion sensed in those last translations? Something that frightened even him? He once wrote, "The deeper I read into their words, the more I feel we are not alone in this past." Perhaps the true, terrifying truth hidden in the Rosetta Stone was never fully spoken. Champollion may have opened the door to ancient Egypt, but what if he only unlocked the first layer? Could the hieroglyphs still be guarding a secret meant to stay buried? Share your thoughts in the comments.